was a dark and stormy night, and I was driving my truck through the remote countryside, miles away from city light. The rain was coming down in sheets, and I could barely see a few feet in front of me. I was feeling tired and restless, and all I wanted was to make it to my destination and get some rest. But fate had something else in store for me. Suddenly, I heard a loud thud and felt my truck shake violently. At first, I thought it was just a pothole, but when I looked out of my window, I saw something that made my blood run cold. A massive animal was attacking my truck, clawing at the metal and snarling viciously. It was like nothing I had ever seen before, with razor-sharp teeth and eyes that glowed like fire. I knew I had to act fast, or I would be its next meal. I slammed on the gas pedal and tried to drive away, but the creature was too fast for me. It kept pace with my truck, swiping at the windows and howling like a demon. I could feel its hot breath on my neck, and the stench of rotting flesh filled my nostrils. I was in a panic, trying to steer my truck and fight off the creature at the same time. My heart was racing, and my hands were shaking as I fumbled for my gun. I fired several shots at the beast, but it only seemed to make it angrier. It let out a deafening roar and lunged at me with its claws. I managed to dodge its attack, but the truck swerved off the road and crashed into a ditch. I was dazed and disoriented, but I knew I had to keep fighting. I crawled out of the truck, still clutching my gun, and faced the creature head-on. We circled each other, both of us panting heavily. The rain was still pouring down, making the ground slick and treacherous. I could see my breath in the cold air, and I knew I was in for the fight of my life. The creature charged at me again, and I fired my gun. This time, the bullet hit its mark, and the beast let out a final, ear-splitting scream. It fell to the ground, its body twitching and convulsing. I stood there for what felt like hours, staring at the lifeless body of the creature. I was covered in mud and blood, my heart racing with adrenaline. I knew I had survived a brush with death, but I also knew that I would never forget this night. As I drove away from the scene, I couldn't help but wonder what other monsters might be lurking in the darkness, waiting to pounce on unsuspecting travelers like myself. The road ahead seemed endless. My mind was racing with questions. What kind of creature was that? How did it get there? Was it the only one, or were there more? The storm was still raging, and the wind was howling like a pack of wolves. My truck was battered and bruised, and I was lucky it was still running. I drove for hours, hoping to find some sign of civilization, but there was nothing in sight. Eventually, I saw a faint light in the distance, and my heart leaped with hope. It looked like a gas station, and I knew I had to stop there and call for help. I pulled into the parking lot, and my headlights illuminated a scene that made my blood run cold. The gas station was in shambles, with broken windows and torn-up pavement. The doors were hanging off their hinges, and there was no sign of life. It looked like it had been abandoned for years, and yet the light was still on inside. I cautiously approached the building, my gun at the ready. As I pushed open the door, I was greeted with a sight that made me wish I had never come. Inside, there were dozens of mutilated bodies, torn apart by something that could only be described as a monster. The walls were splattered with blood, and the air was thick with the stench of death. I could see claw marks on the floor, and I knew that whatever did this was still out there. I knew I had to get out of there, and fast. But as I turned to leave, I heard a noise that made my heart stop. It was the sound of something breathing, something big and angry. I spun around, my gun at the ready, and saw the creature that I thought I had killed. It was alive and well, and it was standing right in front of me. I fired my gun, but it didn't even flinch. It just stood there, its eyes fixed on me. I knew I was outmatched, but I refused to go down without a fight. The creature was massive, at least 7 feet tall, with fur as black as midnight. Its eyes glowed with a sinister light, and its claws were longer than my fingers. It charged at me, and I dodged to the side. I fired my gun again, but it had no effect. I could feel its hot breath on my face, and I knew that this was the end. Just as I was about to be torn apart, I heard a sound that made me feel hope. It was the sound of sirens, and I knew that help was finally on the way. The creature turned to face the noise, and I took my chance. I ran as fast as I could, not looking back until I was sure I was safe. When I finally turned around, the creature was gone. The sirens were getting closer, and I knew that I had survived another brush with death. As I sat in the ambulance, wrapped in a blanket and covered in bandages, I couldn't help but wonder what other horrors were out there, waiting for their next victim. The world was a dark and dangerous place, and I knew that I would never be the same again. Now let's hop onto story number 2, but before I begin reading, make sure that you have subscribed to Mr. Scare for regular horror podcasts. I had been driving for hours, and the only thing keeping me company was the monotonous hum of my truck's engine. It was late at night, and I was on a deserted stretch of highway, with nothing but the occasional street light to break up the darkness. Suddenly, my truck came to a stop. I quickly checked my gauges, but everything seemed to be in order. I tried to start the truck, but the engine wouldn't turn over. I stepped out of the cab to check the engine, but before I could even open the hood, I heard the sound of footsteps approaching. I turned around to see a group of men, their faces obscured by black balaclavas. I instinctively reached for my tire iron, but before I could make a move, one of them pulled out a gun and pointed it at my head. The man in a gruff voice said,
"Hand over your wallet and keys."
I hesitated for a moment, unsure of what to do. But as I reached for my wallet, a rustling sound in the nearby bushes caught my attention. Suddenly, a large, wild animal lunged out of the bushes and attacked the robbers. I didn't get a good look at it, but it was unlike any animal I had ever seen before. It was massive, with razor-sharp teeth and claws, and it moved with a terrifying speed. The robbers were taken by surprise, and before they could react, the animal had already torn through their ranks. I heard the sound of gunshots, but they only seemed to anger the creature further. In a matter of moments, the robbers had scattered, their screams echoing across the deserted highway. I was left alone with the creature, which now turned its attention to me. I could see its eyes glinting in the darkness, and I knew that I was in serious danger. I backed away slowly, hoping to get back into the truck, but the creature was too quick. It lunged at me, and I fell to the ground, my tire iron slipping out of my grasp. I braced myself for the worst, but the creature didn't seem interested in attacking me. Instead, it sniffed around me for a few moments, as if trying to decide whether or not I posed a threat. And then, without warning, it bounded away into the darkness, leaving me alone and shaking on the side of the highway. I eventually managed to get the truck. I took a deep breath, trying to calm myself down. I turned on the engine, and the truck roared back to life. I carefully checked my surroundings before continuing down the highway, constantly checking my mirrors for any sign of the robbers or the creature. But nothing seemed out of the ordinary. As I drove, my mind started to race. What was that thing? Was it a wild animal or something else entirely? The questions kept piling up in my mind, and I couldn't shake off the feeling that something was still out there. Suddenly, I heard a strange noise coming from the back of the truck. It sounded like something was scratching at the metal doors. My heart started to race again as I slowed the truck down, trying to see what was going on. But it was pitch black outside, and I couldn't see a thing. All hell broke loose when my engine died, and I was stuck there in the pitch dark. I literally had no other choice but to climb down and check what was wrong. I pulled over to the side of the road and cautiously climbed out of the truck, my hand resting on my gun. As I walked around to the back of the truck, the scratching noise grew louder and more frantic. My heart pounding in my chest, I lifted the latch and slowly opened the door. And that's when I saw it. The creature that had attacked the robbers was now inside my truck. It was a massive creature with fur as black as night and eyes that glowed like fire. Its long claws dug into the metal floor, leaving deep scratches in its wake. Its teeth were razor sharp, and drool dripped from its jaws. I stood frozen in fear, not knowing what to do. The creature lunged at me, and I stumbled backward, tripping over my own feet. I fell hard on the ground, my gun flying out of my hand. The creature was on top of me in an instant, its hot breath on my face. I closed my eyes, expecting the worst, but nothing happened. When I opened my eyes again, the creature was gone. I sat up slowly, rubbing my head where I had hit it on the ground. But the creature was nowhere to be seen. I climbed back into the truck thinking I would rather spend my night in the truck than step out. I decided to turn the key in case my engine comes to life. Thankfully, it did. My hands were shaking. I drove the rest of the way in a daze, my mind still trying to process what had just happened. When I finally reached my destination, I parked the truck and sat there for a while, trying to collect myself. As I sat there, I couldn't help but think about the creature. Was it still out there, waiting for its next victim? Or was it just a figment of my imagination, brought on by the stress of the night's events? What was that creature? Where did it come from? And most importantly, would it come back? I may never know the answer, but one thing is for sure, I will never forget the night a group of robbers and a wild creature tried to take me down on a deserted highway. Every time I drive down that stretch of highway, I can't help but feel a sense of unease. There are things out there in the darkness, things that we can't explain or understand. And sometimes, they come for us when we least expect it. It was my first day on the job as a truck driver and I had been driving for hours. I was tired, but I had to make this delivery on time. I was driving through a deserted road in the middle of nowhere, and the only sound I could hear was the engine of my truck. The moon was full, but it was covered by clouds, making it impossible to see anything on the road. I was relying on the headlights to guide me. Suddenly, something ran across the road. It was too fast for me to see what it was, but it was big, really big. I hit the brakes and came to a stop. I was scared, but I thought it was just an animal and that it had run away. I continued driving, trying to forget what had just happened. After a few minutes of driving, I saw something moving in the bushes on the side of the road. It was too dark to see what it was, but it looked like an animal. I kept driving, trying to ignore it, but it was impossible. It was following me, keeping pace with the truck. It was like it was stalking me. Suddenly, the creature jumped out of the bushes and onto the road. It was massive, at least the size of a bear, but it wasn't a bear. It was something else entirely. It had dark, matted fur, and its eyes glowed red in the darkness. It had razor-sharp teeth, and its breath was hot and foul. I tried to speed up, but the creature was faster. It jumped onto the truck, and I could feel its weight shaking the entire vehicle. I was terrified. I had never seen anything like it. I tried to swerve the truck, but it was too heavy. The creature started to claw at the windows, trying to get inside. I could hear its breath and the sound of its claws scraping against the metal. I thought it was going to break through any second. I was running out of options. I had to do something, anything, to get away from this thing. I reached for my flashlight and shone it at the creature. It recoiled, and I took the opportunity to hit the gas. I drove as fast as I could, the creature still clinging onto the side of the truck. It was like it didn't feel pain, like it was invincible. After what felt like hours, the creature finally let go. It disappeared into the darkness, and I didn't see it again. I drove for another hour until I reached a gas station. I stopped there to catch my breath and to try and make sense of what had just happened. I never did find out what that creature was. I tried to describe it to people, but no one believed me. They thought I was crazy or that I had imagined it. But I knew what I saw. I knew that it was real and that it was out there somewhere, waiting for its next victim. From that day on, I never drove at night again. I couldn't bear the thought of encountering that creature again. And even now, years later, I still have nightmares about it. I know that it's out there, watching, waiting. And I know that one day, it will find me again. I've been a truck driver for years, and I've seen some pretty wild things on the road. But nothing compares to what happened last night. I was driving through the middle of nowhere, in the dead of night, with rain pouring down so heavily I could barely see the road ahead of me. Suddenly, my truck just stopped. All the lights on the dashboard went out, the engine died, and I was stuck there, in the middle of nowhere, in the pouring rain. I tried everything I could think of to get the truck started again, but it was no use. I was stuck there, alone, with nothing but the sound of the rain and the occasional distant thunder to keep me company. And then I heard it. A low growl, coming from somewhere out there in the darkness. At first, I thought it was just my imagination, but then I heard it again, closer this time. I turned on the flashlight on my phone and shone it out into the darkness. And that's when I saw it. A pair of glowing eyes, staring back at me from the darkness. And then, before I knew it, the creature leaped at me. I didn't know what to do. I was frozen with fear, watching as the creature barreled towards me. It was like nothing I'd ever seen before. It was like a cross between a wolf and a bear, with razor-sharp teeth and claws that looked like they could tear me to shreds in an instant. Just as the creature was about to pounce, I remembered the can of pepper spray I kept in my truck. I quickly reached for it and sprayed the creature in the face. It let out a guttural howl of pain and recoiled, giving me just enough time to scramble back into my truck. I slammed the door shut and locked it, but the creature wasn't done yet. It started to ram into the side of my truck, over and over again, like it was trying to break through. I was terrified, unsure of how long the truck could withstand the creature's relentless attacks. After what felt like hours, but was probably just a few minutes, the creature finally gave up and disappeared into the night. I sat there in my truck, heart pounding, and tried to make sense of what had just happened. I tried to start the truck, but the engine wouldn't even turn over. It was as if the battery had died. I checked the lights and they were still on, but the windshield wipers had stopped working. As I sat there in the dark and rain, I heard something rustling outside. I rolled down the window just a bit, trying to see what was going on. That's when I saw it, a pair of glowing eyes, watching me from the darkness. I couldn't make out what kind of animal it was, but it looked big and dangerous. I started to panic, wondering if I was going to become its next meal. Suddenly, there was a loud thud on the roof of the truck. The whole vehicle shook and I heard something scraping against the metal. I screamed, thinking that the animal had somehow climbed on top of the truck and was trying to get in. I fumbled for my phone, but it was dead. The rain was coming down even harder now, making it almost impossible to see anything outside. I was completely trapped, with no way to defend myself. Just when I thought it couldn't get any worse, I heard a series of gunshots ringing out in the distance. The animal outside let out a pained howl and then everything went silent. I sat there in the dark for what felt like hours, too scared to move. Eventually, I mustered up the courage to get out of the truck and assess the damage. That's when I saw the bloodstains on the roof, along with a set of deep claw marks. I knew that I had narrowly escaped a deadly encounter with a wild animal, but I had no idea who had saved me. All I could do was thank my lucky stars that I was still alive. I eventually managed to get the truck started again and drove as fast as I could away from that place. I didn't stop until I reached the next rest stop, where I called the police and reported what had happened. The police arrived, but they didn't find any trace of the creature. They told me it was probably just a wild animal that had been spooked by the storm, but I knew what I had seen. I'll never forget those glowing eyes, or the feeling of absolute terror as that creature attacked me. From now on, I'll always make sure to keep that can of pepper spray within arm's reach whenever I'm out on the road. You never know what kind of horrors might be lurking in the darkness.